Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. My name's Alistair Hinton from LGBR Capital. Really pleased to be joined this morning by Alan McFarlane from Dundas Global Investors. This session is the third in a series of seminars that Dundas Global Investors have been giving on different areas of their sort of outlook on the world and different ways of looking at the investment philosophy behind both equities and global investing more generally, as well as dividend growth investing. This morning, we're pleased that the third in the series is now part of the Digital Unique Manager Showcase event. I'm going to hand over very soon to Alan McFarlane from Dundas to give us a little bit of his thoughts on sustainability and governance, obviously a hot topic in the investment world at the moment, something that we see lots of column entries written about, to wrestle with some of the ideas behind that, and I suppose also what is actually at risk or in the favor of the investor. If there are any questions that crop up throughout this, do just put them in the Q&A box. I can see a couple coming in already. We will come to them at the end of the session, if we have time, hopefully. And Alan, I'm going to hand over to you. Sustainability and governance, an investment fad or an imperative?
Alistair, thank you for that, and thank all of you who are on the call. I'm speaking today, obviously, as a partner in Dundas Partners LLP, but ever so slightly in a personal capacity, not because I disagree with my firm, of course I don't, but because this is a topic where each of us has to work out what it is we think, and really being asked to do this obliged me to do some more thinking about that. So this is very much in the spirit of fellow learners in this CPD struggle. The bottom line of the front page really, I think, gets to the heart of it. This is obviously about ESG, and it is about the ever-shifting goals of responsible capitalism. This is not a new topic, but it is a particularly important topic just now, and there are elements of change underway. It's a global challenge. This comes up, we work with clients in New Zealand and Australia and the USA, and we could hold this seminar with people in any of those countries, and they would have just as much interest as you have. The final thing I want to say before we go much further is there's many things that we can hold conversations about, because we know with great precision that if you say football, I know what you mean by football. And even though it's rugby union or whatever type of football, most of us think about the kind of football played by football teams in the football leagues. And we know exactly what that means. We don't have completely defined vocabularies yet. And that's part of the challenge. So you could be having a conversation with someone about sustainability, and they're saying this and you're saying that, and it's quite clear, usually 6 minutes into the conversation, that you're not working on a common vocabulary. So I hope that part of this will address the question of vocabulary and clarity, and be clear about the bits that are yet to be agreed. So let me just get this right. There we go. Sorry, I've gone one too far. Right. Oh, sorry. So taking the question, is sustainability an imperative? Well, of course it is. Of course it is. If you commit capital today to be returned tomorrow, whether it goes up in value or you want it back, but one day you're going to want to spend it, you're taking an oath of optimism. That's our investment mantra, that in equity investing is about gathering the relevant historical data and, if you like, economic and almost semi-philosophical data about why equities should return higher rates than other assets. And you rest on that, and that's all very well, but it's still to happen into the future. So the taking the oath of optimism is to entrust yourself to those prospects, and that implies sustainability. If the thing that you entrust your money to is not sustained, Alistair Darling lives 200 yards away in the same house he lived in when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, and RBS went bankrupt. And some of you may know that Fred Goodwin turned up at his front door with a panettone cake. And it was at that point that Darling understood that RBS was unsustainable. And the government put enough money in to make it sustainable. So sustainability is the very heart of investing. And the longer the liability, the more important that becomes. And if you want to know how important sustainability is, just turn it round and say, what's unsustainable? Well, it's true. It's just a truism to say that unsustainable business must either adapt or fail. And what makes them unsustainable? And how do they adapt? And why would they fail? Well, they fail from competition. They fail from decisions by the boards and management that turn out to be incorrect. Customers leave them. And many people on this call will remember Gerald Ratner trashing every young man in the UK who had saved up to buy one of the engagement rings that was worth a prawn sandwich, and customers never went back. Technological revolutions blow away incumbents. Businesses die because of access to capital. That's happening today in the UK. And they change because of government intervention. So that which was permissible is no longer permissible. One way to think about that is that it's another truism, which is also a cliche. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone. And there's plenty of coal under the ground in the UK, but we don't burn it anymore. And we don't dig for it anymore. So, unsustainable does not mean incapable. It means it isn't sustainable. Is governance an imperative? Now, I'm needing, what have I done? How do I do this? Let's resume the slideshow. Sorry. Thank you. Is governance an imperative? Well, it's absolutely central. Up to the middle of the 19th century, almost every business was a partnership of some kind. So you stood to lose everything if your business failed. Unlimited liability was the norm. Then we created joint stock limited liability companies. There had been some before, but they were the exception, not the rule, whereas today it's the other way around. And that meant that we went from being proprietors and partners in businesses to becoming shareholders with directors. And that created a sort of agent principal risk. Now, we did that by establishing in this country the Companies Act, company law. And company law in the UK makes it crystal clear that the priority for the directors of a company is the interests of its shareholders. Now, other legislation on workers' rights, product liability, environmental duties, they're all really important, but they must be reconciled to the principal objective, which is the interests of the shareholders. And that, as I've said, creates a principal agent problem. So directors run companies on behalf of shareholders, but how do you control them? How do you avoid them putting their interests before yours? And there is yards of literature in the legal industry, economics, and business management on how that is handled, because we have really quite limited opportunities to change or censure the directors of public companies once we entrust our money to them or buy the shares in those companies. This is quite like the problem that you have as fiduciaries, and the fiduciary rule that apply, the way in which fiduciary responsibility is applied in the USA and Canada and the UK and other places. It varies a little, but the principle is the same. We're accountable for how we discharge our duties with other people's money. Now, today, I just wanted to highlight, even though we've got a very vigorous ESG movement and we've had improved governance, governance has improved a lot since the middle of the 19th century to today, but we still have some giant issues. So just to take three, the people, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and Sergey Brin and Larry Page at Alphabet, which used to be called Google, they control the majority of the voting rights, even though they don't control the majority of the stock. So every one of you will browse something today. I'm almost certain of it. And most of you will do something on Facebook. I'm not on it, but I know most people are. You've given them data about yourself for free. And those three individuals control that, not because they own the companies by majority, but because they have been given special voting rights. I think that's a scandal. We own one of them. We can live with that scandal with one, but one of them sticks in my craw, and I couldn't buy it. In many companies in the USA, the chairman and the chief executive is one person. So you chair the meeting and you turn around to the CEO and say, tell me how you've run the company. And the CEO turns around and says, well, that's me. And you have that conversation. Again, that's a scandal. And I can assure you, separate chair and CEO is the exception, not the rule in the USA. Hasn't stopped the US stock market soaring the last 12 years. And finally, this is the daddy of them all. Some of you will have stocks like Alibaba and Baidu in your portfolios, listed in the USA, typically domiciled in the Caymans or somewhere else. They don't even own the assets they operate in China. Those companies are owned by entirely different people, and there are contractual arrangements between the two sides yet to be tested in law, so that if you buy shares in Alibaba, you're actually buying the prospect of maybe getting a cash flow one day based on a contractual relationship subject to Chinese law. There's no direct ownership of the assets because that's forbidden under Chinese law. Now, so far so good. It's worked quite well. There's been some real wobbles in these types of arrangements recently. So there's lots to think about on governance. I just want to show you, this is a page from the company, or it's two snips from the Companies Act of 2006. That's the most up-to-date Companies Act in the UK. And you can see in clause 171, the duty to act within powers. Directors must act in accordance with the company's constitution and only exercise the powers for the purposes which they're conferred. So you might want to change the world if you're a director of Whitbread, but you're there to serve the shareholders of Whitbread. And you've got to reconcile those interests. Now, the detail underneath in paragraph 172 is fascinating. I'm going to read the first bit. A director of a company must act in the way he considers, he implies she here, in good faith would be most likely to promote the success of the company for the benefit of its members, that shareholders as a whole, and in doing so, have regard to. Now, my daughter's a lawyer and assures me that have regard to, these are not shackles. These are provocations, and there's lots of case law in what have regard to. You cannot disregard the interests of the company's employees. You cannot disregard the impact on the community, but not disregarding and regarding are not the same thing. Lots to chew on in that area. So just to highlight, and those of you who are directors of companies, that's your obligation. Now, what I want to go into next is the regime we work on in the UK, and it comes from the Cadbury Code. And the reason that Mr. Adrian Cadbury, who was, I think, the 6th generation Cadbury to run the business, the company had begun by a family of Quakers. I don't know if Mr. Cadbury was a Quaker himself, but he was very keen to for people to understand that the Quakers had played an enormous role in improving corporate governance in the UK in the 19th century. And that we could have a whole day on that. It's so interesting. And the italics at the top are a quote from him in the paper. And this code in 1992 had been brought about by the Financial Reporting Council, the Chartered Accountancy bodies of the UK, and the Stock Exchange, after Polly Peck and Colorol, two notable scandals of the late 1980s. And what Cadbury said is it's all about accountability for governance, that we need boards to work properly. And he made a number of recommendations, but these are the key ones. Firstly, this code is so effortlessly British, it's voluntary. But if you're listed on the London Stock Exchange, and this applies today, you must comply with it or explain why you don't. That's the only rule. It separates the role of chairman from chief executive. I don't know that we have any of those left. Now, you might be a Mike Ashley and get a puppet for the chief executive, up whom your hand is obviously placed, the back of. But it's the separation. And if that doesn't happen, there must be a really strong independent section on the board. The majority should be outside directors. Remuneration, which is where the principal agent problem used to hit. Are they lining their pockets with our money? That should be non-executives, and audit committees should have at least 3 non-executives. Many companies didn't have audit committees in the 80s. So this is the regime we work on, and you can see what it's getting at. It is good governance and transparency. If there's one problem, I think Mr. Cadbury and co, or Sir Adrian as he was, I think they thought we were all as moral as Quakers. And sadly, that's not proved to be true. The human stuff may not be up to the job. So moving from sustainability and governance to the elephant in the room, which is called ESG. Firstly, it's the wrong acronym. And if you want to join me in a campaign to change it, please do. But I think the boat has sailed. It shouldn't be ESG. It should be GSE. Because you can't fix the E and the S without good governance. So governance is the priority. And that's the one that we put most emphasis on. Now, are these fads? No, they're not. They are serious topics. And I hope the earlier discussion has demonstrated that. However, it's a work in progress as to definitions, priorities, and methods. And this is where it gets really quite complicated. There are multiple suppliers of ESG ratings. Now, what does that mean? If we're going to study a company, we can look at the annual report, we can get the annual report and accounts, we can study the numbers, we can read the annual report, but what we can't do is we don't have the resources for the fees that the market will bear to do a complete supply chain check. So the ESG rating companies are stepping into that, and they're saying, we'll do that work and we'll send you reports. And I'm going to show you one in a minute, okay? But there's multiple providers and they are not consistent in their views. Secondly, I don't think it's yet clear what investors want from this, but people on my side of the fence, other than to prove that they're serious about it. I don't think we've defined what nirvana looks like or that perfect future. So it's quite tricky to have agreement when there's disagreement. Now, the organization you may not have heard of, but is the big daddy of this, is the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, started by Kofi Annan in 2006. And what it proposes and is doing is getting membership from most of the world's big fund managers and more smaller ones and big institutions who sign up to the principles, the 6 principles for responsible investment. And we signed up the day we started the firm in 2010. We agree completely with those principles. You've got to demonstrate that you integrate those principles in your daily work. There's been a subtle shift here. PRI now rates managers on their compliance with this. The PRI addresses a wide range of topics, but you would be deaf, dumb, and blind if you missed that one topic dominates, and that is climate change. And so the PRI is on a mission. It's on many, many missions, but that is its most important one to do with climate change. Go and look at the website and see what you make of it yourself. Now, this encourages, one of the things it does is it encourages collaboration between investors to engage with companies. Now, at its basic, that is a wonderful thing, because not enough of us used to vote the shares at company general meetings. I mean, it was like the turnout in a Labour-held Labour-held seat in Liverpool or Glasgow, where the turnout was 50%, because 99% of people were going to vote Labour, so nobody else bothered to turn up. Well, that used to be the case at IBM and Exxon's annual meeting, and that was scandalous. So what they want is more collaboration, but they want to demonstrate more engagement. They want to demonstrate that you're writing to them, talking to them about the principles and their interest in sustainability and the wider issues that the PRI is now taking up. And the PRI has threatened investment managers who don't demonstrate that they really mean this with the chop. Now, that's fine. If you don't live by club's rules, you should leave. But that power is being exerted at a time, or threatened with exertion at a time, when there's more and more interest in proving you're a good ESG manager. So that is a really big threat to managers and an enormous encouragement to the compliance. I'm going to come back to the final bit later. Let's just press on. The next bit of this discussion is a series of snips and slides from various places just to show you some of the live topics on this. But the first thing is, when I was a boy in the 80s and 90s, the standard response to sin-free portfolios or investing more ethically, depending what the ethics were, was, well, hang on a minute, if I don't invest in booze or alcohol or tobacco or Rupert Murdoch's papers, if they've got page 3 girls in them, the reason I can't do that is I'm missing out on all these big investment opportunities. And in the last few years, Morningstar and others, this is a 2018 paper, they're now saying you'll get better returns if you invest for sustainability and ESG. We can come back to that in the Q&A. So whether that's correct or not, that is increasingly the received wisdom in the marketplace. And there's a lot of articles in the FT about how well ESG has done through the COVID-19 crisis. Number 2, the FT has a section now called Moral Money. It's great, it's really good. And it demonstrates the sort of clouded nature of what each of these various terms, morality, ESG, sustainability, and so on and so forth. And this is an article, I'm sorry, I didn't put the date on, it's from last couple of weeks ago. It says, fund managers struggle to compare ESG apples with oranges. And Massachusetts Institute of Technology found that different rating agencies ranked companies really differently. So there's Tesla. Just Capital is rated in the rates Tesla in the bottom 10% of companies, I think for labor and for some of the minerals it uses. MSCI says it's an A. It's fantastic. Well, then that means that when fund managers send their material to you, you'd need to know. Now, you don't need to know if Ernst & Young or Deloitte or Price Waterhouse did the audit. An audit is an audit is an audit, and it's verified by the chartered accountants agencies. But you would need to dig deeper to know whether whether Tesla is an A or not, and whether you think Tesla's an A or not. So this is a real problem at the moment. Next one. This is an MSCI report on a stock we own. It's called IPG Photonics. It's an American company. It makes industrial lasers. It's rated B by MSCI. And these criteria, you'll have the slides. You'll see it's chemical safety, corporate governance, clean tech opportunities. These are the criteria that MSCI picked. We chose MSCI as our provider, and we're just getting used to the material. This is as of March 25th. And here is their rating. Now, might not be able to see this at the moment, but you'll be able to read it later. If you look at the middle section here, this part, this is the bit I want to draw your attention to. Now, IPG Photonics was started up by and is 35% owned by an 80-year-old Russian and his 56-year-old sidekick. And the Russian's called Mr. Gapontsev. He's a PhD from Russia who moved to the USA to build the laser business. If you fear that's infiltration by Putin, these lasers are used in the defense sector, so he's been vetted sideways in every way. This is what MSCI said about their ownership structure. IPG Photonics faces major governance concerns, particularly in its entrenched board, due to a significant number of long-serving directors who could impede sustainable shareholder interests. While the family firm, it's not a family firm, but that's what they've called it, has an independent board majority, concerns on its board independence remain due to the presence of executives on board and related party transactions. In other words, he's got a big shareholding, that might not suit you. I love investing in companies where the management team has a big shareholding. But they're telling me that's not good. And not only are they telling us that, they're using quite loaded language, entrenched, impede, concerns. Now, I don't know who Maria Lorna Seador is, and I don't know what her incentives are, but that, it's going to be the case that when we do settle on that language, and that rating will drive a lot of people's way of asking us questions, why are you investing in that? And we all know we use British standards for seatbelts. There's lots of things we don't question because we trust that they're good. I'm far from convinced that this is the finished article. We were just looking at a company this morning in the office before the call that is controlled by a charity and has been for years, but it's Nordic, it's vaguely biotech, it's good for the world, and they give them a AAA on ownership. So we've not reached an equilibrium. That's not a damning criticism, that's an encouragement for them to do better. The other thing I wanted to point out was that the government, the state, intervenes in business all the time. This happens to be a number of examples. So in 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed. This is the land of the free, the home of the brave, the home of capitalism. And they said, you're too big, Standard Oil. So they broke it up, and they broke up American Tobacco. In 1906, there was concern about the food production industry. There was supposed to be a concern about the human rights of the workers, but actually the concern focused on the food. And we've now got the Food and Drug Administration, and so on and so forth. So the notion that somehow this is all down to investors, I find absurd. It is the biggest hand in the game is the hand of government. And I want to give you an example of this. Those of you who are over 45 will remember the CFC problem in fridges and other places and other machines, and we changed that because of the ozone layer. Now, Thomas Midgley, I'm not saying this is what happened, but others have said that Midgley, who's an American engineer, was probably responsible for as many deaths in the 20th century as some of the very nasty people that we could think about who caused wars. So what did he do? He was an engineer at General Motors, and the first thing he did was he developed an ethylene-lead additive to petrol to stop the engines pinking. And those of you with old cars will know exactly what that means. Incredibly successful. Midgley became very ill from lead poisoning, as did his whole team, and GM covered it up. And now we don't use leaded petrol because the facts came out and the government's legislated against them. But not stopping at that, he then went on to discover ways to improve refrigeration because General Motors owned Frigidaire, which was one of the world's biggest fridge companies at the time. And he came up with chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, which were fantastic. And again, there was some questions about the health implications. But GM shut all that down and on it went. In the 1970s, these two scientists at Caltech discovered the environmental and human damage from CFCs. And within 4 years, the USA banned CFCs. It was banned in this country because the British Antarctic Survey found a hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica. And the only member of the British cabinet who understood the report that came back was one Margaret Hilda Thatcher because of her degree in chemistry before she became a lawyer. So this is a good example where industry makes terrible mistakes, but it takes science and the public and the government and many involved to make it better. You wouldn't want to vote at a GM annual meeting if you tried to change that. I want to finish with 3 slides. And I think these two, the first two, highlight the problem we're in. In March 2019, the Norwegian Wealth Fund, over $1 trillion in size, in a population of 5.4 million people, roughly $200,000 per capita, and which has produced a marvelous statement on investment ethics. They decided to stop investing in upstream oil and gas. They said that's the end. They'd listened to the UNPRI, they'd listened to everything. And that fund is owned by and controlled by the Norwegian state. Earlier this year, the Norwegians announced the opening of the Johan Sverdrup field offshore Norway. Now, I can tell you right now, Nicola Sturgeon would be out of a job in 3 minutes if she said we're going to frack in West Lothian, which we probably need to do. And the production offshore Scotland is in decline. It'd be a very interesting challenge for the SNP if they had the chance of a Sverdrup, because it's Scotland's oil argument died in the last referendum and whether it would come back. But to their credit, at least the Norwegians take it in the chin. What about the climate? They even went so far as to say this is the world's greenest new oil field because it's powered by hydroelectricity from the Norwegian hydroelectric grid. Hypocrisy, human failure, evidence of the problem. The really cynical perspective, of course, I would never dream this up. they're shorting all the other oil stocks worldwide so that the Norwegian supplies maintain their position in the market. Oh no, they would never do that. Okay, final slide. And what I wanted to do is, and I've just managed to lose it. I'm sorry. Back we go. Can you see that? I'll just assume you can see it in its current guise. What do we do at the Heriot Fund? Thanks, Alistair. Just go straight there. What do we do at the Heriot Fund? What's our strategy? Our strategy is that good business is good investment. There is no prize for being Thomas Midgley II. There is no prize for being Union Carbide at Bhopal. There is no prize for being BP at the Deepwater Horizon. And every one of these was a failure of governance, bad incentives, and poor management. And they cost the shareholders billions of dollars. Good business is essential to good investment. We're selective investors. We only own 70 stocks worldwide. So we're not like the big firms who have to own everything, and they have my sympathy for how they have to deal with this. Not much of it, but some. So we avoid 98% of the stocks globally, and many of the stocks we exclude and avoid are on what would be called ESG criteria today. We did it before ESG, and yeah, maybe I'm turning into a grumpy old white male, but I find the crusading as if this new vocabulary explains everything. That hasn't been the case and won't be the case. Our job is to exercise independent judgment on the intersection of wealth generation, returns for your clients, and unacceptable corporate conduct. And we readily take that challenge. In fact, we enjoy it. It's great fun. So it gets me out of bed in the morning to come to work. And our confidence is that the best outcomes for your clients will come where the rule of law applies, where human ingenuity is permitted, where competition between different options are available, and decency prevails. There are other things, but that's the essence for us. Now, we rely on a lot of people. We signed up to the UK Stewardship Code. We signed up to the PRI. We use an organization for ISS to help us vote proxies, and we use MSCI, as you can see, and we love debating with them. But I'll leave you with two questions that are uppermost in my mind, and this is the personal bit, particularly more than the firm bit. Those of you who are fans of George Orwell and 1984 will know that what Winston Smith dealt with was a range of things, but one of them was groupthink. And this ESG bandwagon is accelerating, that there is one interpretation of what our priorities are. We must all sign up to them, and that must be the only priority. The people who promote that at the PRI would think that is a terrible caricature. It's a slight caricature, but I think it is the direction of travel. And groupthink is no good for an active investor. Number two, from reading a lot of company report and accounts, everybody is going to be signed up to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Everybody will have an ESG board member. Everybody will proclaim their ESG credentials. And in the words of Garrison Keillor, the American comedian about Minnesota, that every child in Minnesota was above average, that is where we're heading on ESG. So that will have to happen. There's no option. And then we'll need more insight and more perspective and even more independence. But right now, it would be a near suicidal act for an active manager to say, we are totally disinterested in this. Leave us alone. We're just here to pursue profit. I don't think that's possible anymore. It never was, if that meant I'll just invest in the nasty businesses. That was crazy. But now the burden of demonstrating your virtue is becoming very significant. And we're just going to have to work out whether that's for the advantage or the disadvantage of our co-investors. And I've overrun and I apologize.
Thanks very much, Alan. I think a really interesting topic, and hopefully one that's certainly prompted a few questions and some lively debate, I'm sure, to be had down the line. We haven't got time to do the sort of Q&A online here, but we have got a note of everyone that's asked a question, and we will be in touch to.
And I'll answer them. Be very happy to answer them.
So we'll get answers from Alan on those, and set something up down the line. But look, thanks very much for everyone for joining us this morning. Thank you, Alan, for that session and those thoughts on the sort of the ESG topic that is so popular at the moment. We will be resuming in about 5 minutes, I believe, at 11:40 with the next session for UMS this morning. Thanks very much for joining us, and I'll speak to you all soon.